I'm happy today to be kicking off our session with our keynote featuring Mike McGinnis from Southern New Hampshire University. And his presentation is entitled How Great Dam Leaders Can Make Change Happen Faster. This is, I think, also an apt title or a summary of the relationship that I've been fortunate to have with Mike since the mid-late 1990s, when DAM was sort of in digital diapers, in a way of speaking. And I met somebody who was vital to publishing professional practice from one of the large consulting firms in New York City. And he and I realized we were both trying to figure out what could it mean if we could take publishing content from trade publishers, from the scientific, technical, medical, and mathematical publishing community, and be able to get a hold of those assets and repurpose them, kind of like DAM. Mike was an early thought leader in helping us to conceptualize what we now today recognize is vital to so many types of operations. And Mike continues to be an innovative thought leader, and I welcome the chance to introduce him and have him share his thoughts with us. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, David. Greatly appreciated. I'm just going to take a second here to share my screen because there's a couple of slides that we can use as we go along. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. As David said, my name is Mike McGinnis, and I've had the privilege of working both with David and the Henry Stewart organization for quite a long time, more than I care to admit. But a little bit more about what David was referring to when we started to tackle Publishers Row. We were fortunate to have a leading client that was very visionary and recognized that to meet some of the emerging digital capabilities for books, essentially, that having all their assets in one place was going to be critical. And so we were able to do that initial trade publisher. And then we were trying to push it around Publishers Row. And some of the other publishers at the time were a bit more tentative, but there were circumstances that helped move things along. One of them, unfortunately, being 9/11, that suddenly publishers couldn't get to their content, and not having access to their content was a wake-up call for why they needed to put their content all in one place. On top of that, they were addressing the challenges of the emerging ebook space and the role that ebooks were starting to play as a new format or a new way of delivering digital content. In addition to the publishers, we also were tackling many of the music majors around DAM and digital supply chain. And if you'll recall, in the early 2000s, they were facing their own challenge, if you remember Napster. So suddenly all of their content was online for free, and they were struggling to get all of their content digitized and available in a central location. And when I say digitized, they had digital masters at the time, don't get me wrong, but digitized for distribution, for consumption on the commercial end for their customers. And they needed to do that in ways that were reconfigurable. This was all pre-iTunes. And so I think that we got to see a lot that was going on, and how having your assets digitized, and many of you as DAM practitioners who have been in the space also understand it, but it was interesting how there needed to be a little bit of a kick in the pants for some companies to get off the dime and move their digital agenda forward. And so since then, a lot has transpired. Since getting basic DAM archives in place, many of us have gotten to see companies move up the DAM capability curve, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that's relevant to you as DAM practitioners. And there's been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of great technology, improvements in the user experience, ease of access, but there are still quite a lot of challenges and quite a lot of similar problems that we had 20 years ago that we're still working on. And so anyway, it got me thinking, we're uniquely positioned in a way as DAM practitioners to actually be able to see the entire digital supply chain from content acquisition to content exploitation. And so I thought about digital asset management and how, that word management started to make me realize that the other side of the management coin is the leadership coin, and that we could take a lead role in moving things even further and faster through the use of technology and process change, something we've all as STEM practitioners been doing for a very long time. But if you've started to move up your DAM capability curve and start to get a view across your digital supply chain, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But let's jump in and let me make sure that I'm in the... So the first thing I'd ask you is, can you think of an industry that is not being significantly impacted, if not disrupted, by technology? And someone posited this question to me once. And what was interesting about it was I came up with some and came back with the answer. And each one of them, he knocked it back down and gave me an example of how digital is creating challenges to pretty much every industry. If you think about it, customer stakeholders and their expectations are getting higher and higher. We all expect to experience things on our phones and on our various devices much more seamlessly. It's also impacting margins and revenue. And at the same time, it's creating new opportunities, new customers, new stakeholders, new products, new experiences, new markets and business models. And it's driving transformation. And as DAM practitioners, you are at the nexus of change, because supply chains, whether they're physical or digital, are the lifeblood of most businesses. If you think about any kind of experience you have with a product or a business, it primarily starts with the experience driven by digital content online or on a device. So anyway, got me to thinking, the pace of change, times they are changing. And it got me to thinking of, there's a debate. Are things happening exponentially faster? Are things really occurring at a higher rate of change? Because why do we still have some of the same challenges that we had 20 years ago around metadata, for instance? Quality metadata assignment, the responsibility for metadata, which greases the skids of our digital supply chain. And so I started looking into it and realized that there was an interesting hypothesis. It started with the Red Queen hypothesis. It's rooted in biology, and it comes from the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, the Lewis Carroll book, where she says, now here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And basically in evolution, this hypothesis was that evolution takes a very long time. And we evolve as species very slowly, and more importantly, usually in response to some sort of stress or external factor. And what was interesting about that is that's kind of the way we, especially in technology, not specific to DAM, but we tend to react to many situations and then apply technology to solve problems and process reengineering and a whole suite of things that we can do. But what's interesting, it's very similar to the evolutionary experience of a species. Is there is some sort of stress on the organism, and then we react and change. But it still seems that we're plodding along and we're still trying to advance the ball in many instances. And again, quite a bit of progress over the last 20 years. But there's an interesting complementary hypothesis called the White Queen dynamic. And I think it was intentional when the gentleman who came up with this, by the way, the person who's responsible for the Red Queen dynamic is a gentleman called Van Valen, not Van Halen. And there is another gentleman who started to look at this and say, well, it's not just in response to stress. There are species that evolve in a more proactive or anticipative approach, where they actually start to create diversity because there is some value in evolving along a certain line, but it's not in reaction to stress. And so I like the quote that he used. Sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. And so, there's been this popular notion that that technology is changing who we are and what we do so fast that it's actually an existential crisis. Oops, sorry, it's kind of advancing all on its own. But there's a quote from Jeffrey West, who also works in the space, that's saying, rather than being bored to death, our actual challenge is to avoid anxiety attacks, psychotic breakdowns, heart attacks, and strokes resulting from being accelerated to death. So somewhere within that is a message that I'm trying to say is, yes, there's stress, and yes, there's an inducement for us to try to go drive change in our space. But there are also ways for us to be proactive and take control and take a leadership role to deal with change. Because at the end of the day, the technology part is generally easier than the people part. And so let's talk a little bit more about what we can do as DAM practitioners to help manage change, especially change that's occurring. Sometimes at a very high rate of speed, and sometimes more slowly, and in ways where we need to try to influence it and steer it in a positive direction at a higher rate of speed. So what could be our role? How could we change at whatever speed is required? Some of you that work specifically in technology might have heard of two-speed IT. There's a whole bunch of research and methods and tools for how we can go slow and be secure and manage risk, and how we can go fast and be innovative. And so when I was asked to give this keynote for day 2, one of the requests was to be visionary and to speak about innovation. And I thought, okay, innovation is pretty cool. Dreaming about what the future can look like is fun. But being visionary or innovative could be very important to your business strategy. But we also have to find ways not to be overwhelmed, because it's not everyone's role to be visionary. So we have to be aware. We have to understand where we can apply a visionary approach. What are some of the things that we can bring to bear as DAM practitioners? And this is where that view of the digital supply chain, from acquisition of assets to exploitation of assets, you can start to look for opportunities and be proactive in looking for areas of opportunity where you can make a difference, and don't constrain your thinking. This is where the white queen effect takes root, is be proactive, be anticipative, go look for opportunities. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So become more aware around what's going on across your digital supply chain, not just within the space where you're managing assets and digital asset management services. So now you can start looking at ways to be innovative. And when you take a look at some of the emerging technologies, if you went out and created your own top 10 list, it would look very much like this. Google, top 10 emerging technologies or top 10 innovations, and 5, 6, 7. I'm sorry, I'm still advancing on its own. Many of these, artificial intelligence, machine learning, we hear about this all the time, robotics, process or automation. Some of these might not seem relevant, edge computing, quantum computing, but you'd be surprised that when you scratch at some of these, they are solutions in search of a problem very often. So you have to challenge yourself not to take the bait. The goal is not necessarily just to use technology for the sake of using technology. You have to find ways to find problems in search of these solutions, but that's where preparation meets opportunity, creating awareness of these emerging technologies and looking at them and saying, how could AI or machine learning help? How could robotics, process automation help in regards to metadata, for instance? What are some of the things that you might be able to do? First, you need to understand what the potentials are of these innovative technologies, and then you'll start to see opportunity. You'll start to see problems that exist in your digital supply chain, sometimes beyond the purview of just your specific digital asset management focus. And you can start to look upstream and work with people, and start to look downstream and work with other stakeholder groups across that digital supply chain. And you still are going to need to be practical. What is needed most? Where are the biggest problems, or the problems most worth solving? Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to solve all the problems. Obviously, you can't do that. There's unlimited demand and there are limited means. But what is worth achieving? Your users will help inform that. And so that will create a practical approach and a focus on not just trying to take a solution and find a problem, but take a problem and find a solution. I love this quote, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill bit, they want a 1/4-inch hole. So you're looking for opportunities to help them fill holes in their digital supply chain. And the 1/4-inch drill bit that you might need could possibly be some kind of innovative technology. So it puts it on us as dam practitioners to become aware of what's out there from the perspective of innovation, and go and start to learn about it and bring those opportunities for innovation into our practice and into our digital supply chain. So let's talk a little bit about how you could go about doing that. So first, you have to look at where you're at. So we talked about the music majors and the publishers. They were really in the early stages in the late 90s, early 2000s. Just let's put all our stuff in one place so that we could find it. And you'd think, wow, how hard could that be? These are basic capabilities to store and manage your digital assets. But it's amazing how long it took for many of them to move up to the next phase around production workflow integration and start to actually engage people across the digital supply chain to interact with each other. Sorry, the slides will keep advancing on their own if I don't do something. And this is our goal, right? To move up this continuum and increase our capabilities to the point where we're not just focused on internal workflows, but now we're starting to get into the market and linking to the market with delivery and content services. And each time we do this, it ups the ante on our understanding of our assets. What are these assets? Why did we acquire them? What is their value, or what is their intended value? And do they achieve that value when they reach the eyeballs that, through a content experience? And do they do it in an efficient and an effective way? In other words, can we convey our assets with insight into rights and insight into what the trading partners need? Many of you probably work, whether you're in for-profit or nonprofit, where you have partners that help you to expose whatever digital content you have to your customers, your stakeholders, whomever it is that needs to interact with your content. The more you can interact with them in a seamless fashion and deliver high quality metadata that helps to expose those assets, the more value you will get out of them. And then you need a feedback loop to ensure that you're getting the value that you set out to achieve. But first you need to know, where do you stand within this continuum? What's the assessment of your current capabilities? Because now you'll define your practical approach, and now you can start to understand what to focus on. So we talked about the digital supply chain a little bit. Your dam is or can be the engine that drives your digital supply chain. If you think about it, having all of that content isn't enough. You still need to understand what you can or can't do with that content. And it has a mind of its own. Apparently, I've applied artificial intelligence to this presentation. And so anyway, you have to understand what rights you have to your content, because rights are the gas pedal that power your digital supply chain. They also are sometimes the brake, right? If people don't know what the rights are or don't know how to use them, then they will not use them. They'll be tentative, or worse, they might use them and it might result in some sort of a financial penalty or some sort of a problem with the rights holder. So you have your dam as the center of your digital supply chain. You have your rights informing. So this is now you looking upstream. What am I doing with my rights? How much of an understanding do I have it? Now you look downstream. What is the performance of my rights? If we're managing the content effectively, you're going to have happier customers and shareholders. And so the idea now is to take a view, look upstream, look downstream, create a feedback loop, and see if your digital supply chain is as efficient and as effective as you need it to be. This is where you will now need to take, or at least consider taking, a leadership approach. And the reason is you might only be responsible for, you might only be responsible for digital asset management, but you're really responsible for the performance of your digital assets across that supply chain. So it was 20 years ago that Gary Hamel wrote a book called Leading the Revolution. Interestingly enough, it should have probably been called Leading the Evolution, because it is still relevant 20 years later. It's amazing what he was speaking to in terms of roles we could play in driving innovation in our businesses and our industries. And so he had a lot of really great insights that I'd like to share with you, because there's an opportunity for you to take a leadership position. And I think it starts again with the vision. Where are you heading? What's amazing is we are now at a point as a species where we can work backwards from our imagination and realize things. Is there anything someone could say to you today and you'd be like, that's impossible? You know, if you saw a headline tomorrow that someone actually built a prototypical transporter like in Star Trek, and you'd be like, wow, really? Not like, oh, come on, like that's completely impossible and could never, ever happen. It would pique your interest. You might still be skeptical and you might still think, oh, it's early going, but it's amazing how what we can imagine is becoming real now. And the gap between that imagination and our ability to accomplish it has never been, shorter. But you have to move from having a vision to a goal. You have to move from thinking to doing. And that's where being practical and being focused and creating a goal is important. And I'm sorry, I'm going to just reset this so that it doesn't keep moving. So be goal-oriented, and that's where you're looking for problems in search of solutions, because there's unlimited wants and limited means from your business. You've got to get them focused and get your related teams, the collaborative teams, focused as well. Because change is hard. Again, technology is usually the easy part, and change is scary. And so it's what I call the panic. As soon as we moved in to start doing digital asset management for the trade publisher, all the folks upstream that were suddenly going to have the burden of putting metadata onto these assets were like, why do I have to do this? Why is it my job to do this? And we tried to explain to them and convince them, because we hadn't actually done it yet, that because their downstream burden would be reduced. No one would be calling them looking for assets all the time. And I remember one art director at the trade publisher said, "You promise?" So she was skeptical, but we ended up doing it, and we managed them through the change. And so then the other thing is the do-over. And for those of you that have had the opportunity to work in an environment where agile methodologies are used, it's really amazing, because it's an iterative approach to reprioritizing and delivering in increments, but also reacting to changes in your assumptions or changes in your strategy. There are often times you start off in a direction and find out, oh, that's not actually where we need to go. You've heard the one about a pilot is only directly on course less than, 2 or 3% of the time. They're almost always adjusting their course. They're going a little bit in this direction, a little bit in that direction. 98% of the time, they're tweaking where they're going, but they're directionally correct, hopefully. So you need to be prepared to manage folks through the change of the do-over, where it's not a failure. The expression that comes to mind in Agile is fail fast. It's really not fail fast. The goal isn't to fail fast. The goal is to recognize that what you were doing was incorrect and course correct. And so recognize that what you're doing and recognize failure fast, and then iterate and do it over. What's also important is you can't just do it for the sake of doing it. The goal here is to create wealth or value for your stakeholders, and for whomever your users are or the participants in this process. The other thing is it's not just about being different. I think it's an interesting tag. What is not different is not strategic. That means you do have to differentiate yourself, and that's important from a strategy perspective. But you also have to make a difference. That what you're doing needs to have an impact on your internal stakeholders and your external users, customers, whomever. You have to meet markets, but there's a whole market for ideas. There's a whole market for capital that you can tap into as a leader driving this, and for talent. And so to drive innovation, you need to tap into those markets because they're interconnected. You need to look to markets for ideas across your digital supply chain. You need to understand what it's going to take to tap into those ideas and bring them into reality, and who it's going to take. It's a collaborative approach. You won't be able to do it by yourself. And then there's your experience. He has this concept of the gray-haired revolutionaries, which I love, because there's a lot of experience. I had the opportunity to manage a team that had people that had been around for 20, 30 years, and some that had been around for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it was an interesting culture clash between them that came together once they realized that they had shared goals and that they could learn from each other. And so tap into the experience you have at all ends of the spectrum, because at the end of the day, yeah, we want to be opportunistic. Yeah, we want to be wildly imaginative, but we still need to be brutally efficient. We're still facing, I'll say it again, unlimited wants and limited means. And it's our job to help navigate that change in a way that delivers results in an efficient manner, so that we don't wear people down either financially or wear people down through long, arduous programs that take a long time. Now, again, we have some challenges because we still have some problems around metadata, especially, that is not moving as quickly as I thought it might have or would like for it to move. Let's find opportunities to innovate on that in ways that are imaginative, on ways that are innovative, but also on ways that are brutally efficient. So I thought this was an interesting quote to leave you with. You're in a very interesting position to be a change agent and to be a value creator, but above all, to be a leader. And that word that got me started was management, digital asset management. And I've moved into a new organization recently that's grown at an amazing rate of speed. It's one of the largest online universities. And it just continues to grow. And what I realized is one of their leadership is incredible. Our challenge is management, because as your organization gets larger and as things move faster in markets and as things change, complexity evolves as you get bigger and more spread out within a market. And so management is about dealing with complexity. Leadership is about dealing with change, and you're going to need both sides of that coin to be a leader in your space, while still delivering digital asset management services. So I know I we right up to the edge here. I apologize because they want to try to keep us on track. But David, I don't know if we have time for questions, but certainly people can ask me questions in the chat room, and I'm at your service.
Well, Mike, and I think at your service helps to exemplify so much of what you've done for our field since we first started traipsing up and down 6th Avenue in New York together. And as you've reinvented yourself and applied both of those themes of management and leadership to be in a consultative role and in a leadership role, then to be working with a leading publisher. And Mike has been for the past several years at AMC, also exploring these issues and helping them to become real within the organization, and not just, we've got a plan. And most excitingly, I think your move to the university world exemplifies something that all of us recognize, which is the power of digital enablement serves us whether we are working in a for-profit world or a mission and mandate world. Thank you for your opening remarks, and appreciate your being available through chat and on the panel later. And we'll be talking to you very soon.